All right, so thank you guys, and welcome to panel 3, Utilizing Communication Solutions. I just want to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone, because I know we're in different parts of the world. So thank you for taking the time to come here and speak. As we know that effective communications is critical for any disaster response operation. You know, it's the key between life and death in circumstances, and we need to have efficient and effective communications no matter where we are. So this panel today is going to have a discussion around communications, its criticality. We're going to speak to, you know, training, sharing of resources, data exchange. We're going to touch a wide gamut of different areas, because as you would have known, you would see from the bios of our panelists that we have a very diverse group. So what I want to do first and foremost is to introduce you to our panelists, and I will start in a clockwise direction from my screen. So I'll ask Mr. Francis Raveneau from Basecamp Connect to just I'll ask each panelist to give a brief introduction of themselves, and we'll start with Mr. Francis Raveneau.
Yes, thank you, Oronde, and it's a pleasure to be part of this panel. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing for Basecamp Connect. We are a provider of search and rescue communications equipment, disaster response communications equipment, and we also do public safety, so police, firefighters, and we also provide NGOs like the Canadian Red Cross.
Thank you. So we'll go to Mr. Rogerio Mobilia Silva from UNOCHA ROLAC.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Oronde. Thanks for the opportunity. My name is Rogerio Mobilia. I've been currently the head of office at the regional office for OCHA, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. But over the past 25 years on my humanitarian experience, I have been doing telecoms and information management aspect of specifically during the emergencies in natural disaster or complex crisis. It is a pleasure to be here, discuss with these panelists about communication, information management to better response.
Thank you. So I'll ask Simon Gray of Eutelsat to introduce himself.
So my name is Simon Gray. I'm Senior Vice President of Civil Government at Eutelsat. Eutelsat is the 3rd largest satellite operator in the world. I've been involved with the humanitarian arena since 2004 when collaborating first with NetHope. And I worked with CDEMA since 2 years, and I had the privilege of seeing CDEMA react to the hurricane in the Bahamas. And I'm a director of the GVF for the last 10 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll ask Dag of NetHope to introduce himself.
Yes, hello, my name is Dagbjartur. Well, Dag is enough. Brynjarsson, I am the program manager for emergency preparedness and response at NetHope. I've been doing disaster response for over 30 years now, both with Icelandic search and rescue, both nationally and internationally. And now I've been with NetHope for 5.5 years, and doing all kinds of disaster response with NetHope. I have a background in telecommunications as well, so I had a 25-year career in telecommunications before coming over. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And Mr. David Meltzer, GVF.
Thank you, Oronde, and thank you for the panel organizers for the opportunity. I lead GVF, which is the global trade association for the satellite industry. Many of our members actively participate in disaster preparedness and disaster response, and GVF, along with many of our members, are proud signatories with the United Nations World Food Program to what we call the Crisis Connectivity Charter, and I'm sure you'll hear about that later. Prior to GVF, I had the privilege of leading the international disaster response activities of the American Red Cross. So very much had the perspective of not just a provider of communication services, but a consumer of communication services in the disaster context. And then earlier in my career, spent many years at Eutelsat, a global satellite communications provider. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, panel. So what I want to do is I'll start with, first and foremost, I'll start with you, David, because one of the key areas of this panel is talking about the actual communications technology. So we'll move into that, but we're definitely going to segue into the actual use of data. It's, you know, how to access that data, what happens when we can't. So first and foremost, my first question is to you, David. What do communications providers need to know in the first few hours in order to restore communications post-disaster?
So in the first few hours, for those in the audience who haven't had the unfortunate experience of living through a disaster, you just have to realize it's chaos. People, resources that you naturally would turn to are unavailable. And so what is really critical in the early hours of a disaster is knowing what human and equipment resources are at your disposal. Having a good understanding, if you had a warehouse with telecommunications equipment, is that warehouse still standing? Is the equipment unaffected? What equipment did you have in there? How much of equipment? If you rely on colleagues to actually operate the equipment, are they available? Can you establish any communications with them? Or are they hopefully, you know, readily available so that you can coordinate in the first few hours of a disaster the initial activity, which has to be assessing the damage. You cannot get into addressing needs until you obviously assess the damage. And that really is the critical activities in the first few hours. Understand what human resources are at your disposal, what equipment resources are at your disposal, and then start your initial damage assessment.
Thank you. So following on to that, I'd probably like to ask you, Francis, you know, what are the most common issues and problems reported by users of communication systems, and how do we avoid them?
Yeah, I took a note with David's comment on assessing the damage, and one of the initial phases is you don't necessarily know who will be there first. You know, there's a certain amount of people that are qualified to do that. The first point is, how are you going to relay the information of your assessment? And how is that going to be done? Is it going to be through sat phone? Is it going to be through radio? And on the receiving end, how will you receive that? Now, when we talk, and we did surveys throughout our customer base in Asia and North America, both in the search and rescue area and in the disaster response. And what comes the most often is that there is movement in personnel, specifically in ICT personnel. So information, communications, and technologies, there's a lot of movement in that type of personnel. So there's a certain part of knowledge that goes away with that personnel, and we need to retrain new people. So how do we make sure that regardless of who will be there on scene first, that information will be carried through? So it's a very simple concept, and in the application, I guess it's more in the preparedness phase that you could really plan out and make sure that you avoid to have mishaps once you're deployed. When we're talking about issues with communications on our side, it's more in the deployment phase. So once the assessment is done, once you are partially or fully deployed within a site, the people who are there, are they qualified? Can they operate the units? Do they have the necessary knowledge? And since we're talking about disaster response, sometimes there are caches that will have some equipment in safe locations. Once you get that out, how can you replace parts on site if something gets broken? So those are the most common issues. Of course, all of these suppliers will tell you how solid their equipment is, but it's not foolproof. and it's not 100% foolproof, never. So the capacity of having, let's say, commercial off-the-shelf components that you can easily run to a local store and change, let's say, a telephone that was broken. That's not necessarily a complicated IP phone that needs to have programming. That's part of the keys when we're thinking about systems, to make sure that no matter who is going on site, they can set up the units, they can operate the units, and they can repair parts of the units or the whole of the units themselves. And I'm going back to a conversation I had earlier with Simon, just on the satellite side, how things evolved over the years, how it used to be complicated. Then you had to set up the dish, the modem, how to hit your satellite and make sure you're correctly aligned. And that has been shrinked in size and automated a lot, so that, you know, it takes from hours back in the day down to minutes today, so that a lot of people can do it, can use it, but can also set it up very simply and effectively without having the need of training every month or every three months or every 6 months. So there's a part of knowledge that stays within the organization by ricochet, because the systems are now simpler, easier to operate. Right. So this is our take on the issues and problem. And I'm looking at some of my notes here. There's a part of the reliability of the material, and the most reliable material might not be the most performing material, but it certainly will be the one that gets the job done when you need it. So it's not about bells and whistles. It's about having something that's stable, that can do the job, that can withstand rain, heat, cold, humidity, and all the environmental factors, and still go on, like the Energizer Bunny, put it that way.
Thank you very much, Francis. Point taken. Reliability is key. Reliability is key. We want stuff that when we go out with it, we know for sure it's working. Dag, I want to come to you on concerning a point that Francis just made. You know, he spoke about training. You know, based on your experience in NetHope, and I know NetHope has been one of the partners who've done some training here at CDEMA also. You know, speak to us, tell us about the importance of providing disaster response training to ICT personnel, you know, to ensure they effectively participate in the response.
Yes, thank you. It's from our side, from our experience, it's crucial. It's crucial that not only people have the ICT knowledge or IT knowledge, but also has a knowledge about what it is to deploy to a disaster affected area. Who are the main players? Where can you go for coordination? You can go to UNOCHA to get coordination, or you can go to ETC or where you can get the information that you need. But as well, just to get into these are very, very stressful surroundings to deploy into a disaster. You need, and this is our view, and this is what we've been working at now for some years, is that what we want to do is train up local IT personnel as much as possible. We think it's, so basically, to start with, those that live in that area or in that country are the real first responders. We can glorify international assistance and things like that, but the real first responders are those that live there, those that are there, and those are also those that need most of our support. But still, these are those that are responding, and for them to have a basic knowledge, for them to have a knowledge not only of how the system works, but as well how to install a VSAT, have at least some level of knowledge of how to install a VSAT or a point-to-point device, so that you can get your connection into the area where you're going, or even just networking, putting up a Wi-Fi and setting up a secure network, because that's also very, very important, is that everything that we provide needs to be secure. of course, this is very special circumstances, but we still need to be able to provide a secure network. One thing that Francis came into is getting the right equipment there. And I totally agree with him. We need to have as robust equipment as possible. That's our main goal, always. But another thing that we need to think about as well is what's available locally. There are a lot of IT shops, companies all over the world that are actually providing equipment that we can use. So we can actually have a lot of the equipment already in country. We don't have to import everything. Import procedures are very hard, especially when it comes to networking and IT and telephony equipment. There's a lot of regulations around it, and it can be cumbersome and it can take a long time. Usually, this type of equipment is not listed as the humanitarian support, and that's also something that we need to change, because today it is communications equipment is becoming just as important as many other support to these emergencies.
Thank you. So we're not finished with equipment yet, not by a long shot. But I just want to switch it up a bit and speak to more of the data side of it. So Rogerio, tell us about the importance of the data readiness and what the responsibilities its responsibilities in preparedness and response phases. And in addition to that, maybe you can even speak to some of the data collection requirements in poor or in times of poor connectivity, or in areas of no connectivity.
Of course, I do. And without distancing from the previous topics, when we were mentioning about the use of technology, it's almost impossible to think about responding to an emergency without communication equipment, data transmission. But one part of the preparedness mentioned by Francis, it's becoming more and more important to really get data ready and in a structured way. But the other components, data ready to be accessed. So we need communication to be fast and quick on the first days of this disaster. Otherwise, it's useless to have data in a server somewhere in the world, but then we don't have internet connectivity, satellite. That's why we need those colleagues coming with us to reestablish the connectivity or create a new one if the damage is so strong. So we create new channels and we provide internet to humanitarians. But yes, changing a bit from the equipment to the flow of information, we have been working hard intensively for the past 5 years. The work started way before that, but we are trying to standardize what we call communication, common operational data set. Why this is important? It's a group of data that is standard for each country and composed by administrative areas, rivers, roads, ports, airports, infrastructure, and population data. Once we have this established, and not easy to get, it's easy to talk about, but then identify, codify, standardizing P codes so the GIS people can work on them and make map faster. It's not an easy work, but what OCHA is trying to do globally with Humanitarian Data Center and starting with HDX platform a while ago is to do this. Let's get the data sets that is commonly used by all humanitarian and partners. Let's create a certain level of standards and let's save in a place that's easily accessible to anyone. So everybody who comes to a country, most of us from OCHA perspective, we are dealing with emergencies that's overpass the capacity of the national civil defense or national authority to respond. So most of our work is to support foreigners coming to the country to provide a response. So people usually don't know that reality, don't know that landscape. That's why we come with a data standardized, available in one-stop shop. Everybody knows. That's why we're trying to standardize those names. Like I'm saying now, HDX is one important name on this. That's why you're saving one place, all CODs. We have even a music for that, the COD, the Common Operation Data Set. So everyone working on emergency who requires a map on population, on roads, on infrastructure, know where you are and can produce a preliminary document, maybe with no precision, but every map will be more or less the same if we use the same data center. This is one important thing before coming to a country. So you can have the map of a disaster area supported by satellite image that comes very fast these days. And even better, they have this ability, and colleagues who, Simon and Dag and everybody who works with the superb work. We use UNOCHA as a channel, but I'm sure you're part of it and you know colleagues from there. The ability to provide comparable data, destruction data before and after in just a few days, even before teams, rescuers are accessing the area is impressive. And another important comment on this is the technology that provides on a mobile phone the capability to do forms, go into the field, collect the data, and as soon as I get connected, my data is one repository. This helps a lot. And this is the use. I can mention one because that's the one we have proposed on humanitarian business, that's Kobo Collect, but it's open platform. There's many other platforms there that helps us to spread the idea that yes, paper form is important. Yes, old-fashioned data collection is still valid, and you have to have it as a plan B or maybe a plan C today. But using this technology that speeds up the process of collecting data from multiple points, multiple teams, centralizing immediately with an easy way of to inform, because before we had to do a system, and now you can build a form in minutes, basically. Of course, minutes to build a form. The best way is taking months in preparedness, discussing with your teams, collecting the questions, creating, designing, and testing. So preparedness phase, as Francis said, is really important, not only important for them when they are selecting the place to store the equipment, identifying locations, and get the right equipment for the right emergency. But also for us, it's important to have the right form to be used during the early days when the connectivity is still poor or maybe none.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Just one quick follow up on that. We also, and yes, we worked closely with OCHA, and we've been developing what we call the Caribbean Risk Information System, which basically is an evidence-based repository. It's a repository for persons to come and link in and get information on disaster risk management in the Caribbean. And one of the key things for that, the key areas of that, is that we want it to be a repository where you can use it to make decisions based on evidence. You know, it's not no pie in the sky guesstimates or anything like that. It's solid information that you're using. So one of the challenges that we've had in the GeoCRIS, which is the geospatial portion of that, is actually collecting the data. So Rogerio, I just want to know, in your data collection activities, how do you sort of get away, circumvent, or work around the reluctance sometimes by for data sharing?
Can I use a word, persistence? And persistence means try to repeat the approach using different abilities and words and new ways of trying to convince colleagues. It's not easy, huh? And sometimes countries and partners are just collaborating to a certain project like not crisis, but because others are joining. So sometimes, to my knowledge, I think it's best to use the partners who really interested to provide easily, that you don't need to spend too much energy with them negotiating, but they are open to share whatever it's needed, and then invite the others to see. You see, this is a movement that's gaining momentum, that's growing. Be part of it. I think this is the best way, from my knowledge, in Latin America for the past 14 years, more or less. And sometimes the strongest one would be the last one to join, and they have their own reasons. We cannot discuss the reasons since we don't have any legal framework to impose data sharing to anyone. Countries are sovereign on their use and the sharing data, so we cannot force anyone to do it. When we don't have the official one, we use whatever is available, not thinking that's the best possibility we have in that chance. And then after that response, that's when you usually start negotiating to have a data set that was there, nobody knew it, or maybe somebody knew it, but it couldn't be accessed back then. So negotiating persistence and creating strong network of reliable people that trust on the objective. Why we need that data? It's to provide a transparent humanitarian action. So I think this is the best way to approach, from my knowledge. But this doesn't make things easy.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Simon, I want to go back a bit to equipment, but also it's related to some of what Rogerio mentioned in connection with the fact that, you know, some of their solutions have to be designed in such a way that, you know, they're not dependent on an active connection. So what and then I also, my question also touches a bit on some of what the other panelists were speaking about, where it's not easy to get equipment in sometimes to the country, and also based on different customs and customs regulations and so on, but also the true first responders being the actual people on the ground. So can you speak a bit to maybe about the benefits of possibly, you know, pre-positioning terminals across the region, and maybe even speaking to a possibility of a region-wide connectivity solution?
Thank you, Oronde. And the first part of your question about regional coverage. Yes, satellite is the only technology that offers regional coverage. So, for example, you could have your emergency bandwidth, whatever it is, reserved for the region, and 99% of the time, it will be doing civil applications such as closing the digital divide or remote education, etc. And then at times of crisis, the bandwidth gets switched over to disaster relief. So, for example, in Europe, your bandwidth is supplying educational connectivity in the north of Sweden for 99% of the time, and then there's an earthquake in Italy, and that bandwidth gets switched straight over to disaster relief communications. So satellite is the only technology that offers you that kind of geographical flexibility. And pre-positioning for me is one of the essentials in any kind of national emergency plan. And simply because logistics in a disaster are a nightmare. You have problems getting to the area, and once you've got to the area, then you have problems being transported within the area, whether it's you can land at the airport, but you can't actually get to the north of the island, for example, if you're in the Caribbean. So therefore, pre-positioning is essential. And take my design for the Caribbean, I would estimate between 200 and 300 terminals. So you'd have 2 to 3 to 4 terminals per island. And pre-positioning is a multi-layered kind of concept in the sense that you need a terminal that is low cost. You can't have a terminal that costs $10,000 or $20,000 because then the Caribbean can't afford to buy 200 or 300 of them. So cost is crucial. The second crucial element in pre-positioning is the terminal is simple. The terminal is simple to put up and to deploy. Okay, and that takes a lot of time to design an antenna system that is intuitive and simple for anybody with no training, just being able to watch a 20-minute YouTube video and then they can install it. Okay, that takes a lot of time and planning beforehand. The other thing you have to remember is logistics. Okay, again, as I've said, logistics is a huge problem. Therefore, your pre-positioned terminals can't be 2.40 meter wide terminals or 3 meter terminals that require a truck, that require concrete foundations. Therefore, you're looking at a 1 meter terminal that you can fit in the back of a car, or you can fit on a horse, and you can get to the affected area. Okay, and the other thing that you need to know about pre-positioned terminals, they need to be simple to install so that this person can just have a mobile phone and he installs the satellite terminal with his mobile phone app. Okay, because you don't want to be dispersing expensive analyzers to every island and having to train people to use those analyzers. You need it to be simple, intuitive, low cost. And for example, when we deployed to the Ebola outbreak in 2016 with NetHope, I'd done an installation training program in Sierra Leone a year and a half before. And when Ebola came around, I had a database of 100 installers and all the installers left Sierra Leone. So even if you train people, you can't rely on them being there. So that means that you've got to have a system that is intuitive and simple to roll out. And it reduces training requirements as well, so that you're working from both ends of the problem. You're making it simpler and you're reducing training requirements. Now, another thing for pre-positioning that we need to think about is Iot Environmental Monitoring, whether it's temperatures in a forest so that you're monitoring for forest fires, whether it's flooding, whether it's earthquakes. Now, a problem we've had before is that you have an earthquake, power goes out, the cellular network goes down, and therefore there's no early warning system for the tsunami that's coming. So you need to have satellite terminals that are working on solar panels, batteries, etc. And these IoT monitoring can then supply, and they're independent of the power grid, they can then supply the early warning for the tsunami. So it really is a multi-layered approach to pre-positioning. Because let's be very clear, to be without electricity, to be without running water or clean water, to be without now communications, people see it as a human right, and it's a shock. They're in shock when they can't communicate with people. So we need to think about also communication for the affected population. And that does mean pre-positioned terminals near those centers of population, near those rural centers of population, so people can immediately contact their family, etc. So I think that covers my reply on pre-positioning and regional solutions.
Okay, thank you very much. And you mentioned Internet of Things. I want to throw out to the panelists. We hear all these buzzwords, the new technologies out there: augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all these different things. How do you see these, assisting or playing a part in the future or now, in the technology or in the equipment or however how we respond to disasters? That's for anyone. Simon, I see your hand up.
very much. Yes, I think this is one of the most exciting innovations in the satellite industry that's going to come along in the next 2 years. And for example, Eutelsat is deploying a fleet of mini satellites at LEO orbit. So they're very close to the Earth, and these satellites will work with very low power, very low cost sensors. So these sensors are designed to stick on a cow, for example, so that you can track where your cow is. Or these sensors are to disperse in a forest so that you can have temperature readouts, so that is against monitoring forest fires or flooding or earthquakes or anything like this. So for me, you can also have asset tracking. Now, if we think about the idea of personnel tracking, asset tracking when you're shipping it into a region, whether that's a truck for the WFP or loaded with food, or whether that's a communications asset, you can start to track it now, or you will be able to start to track it now for very low cost. And for me, this is one of those revolutions that's going to come along in the next 2 years, and it will help to revolutionize our approach to disaster relief communications.
Yeah.
Francis?
I'm going to add to what Simon said on the Internet of Things, and I think that was a great point, and specifically on the cost side. What we're working on right now and what we're seeing is how to ensure situational awareness and overlaying GPS positions of people on maps and combining that with danger factors and other things like that, and automating that if they are using a radio and having a GPS point from that, or if they are having a cell phone, and trying to do it without or with minimal involvement from the operator of the communication system. That's what we're working on, and we're seeing a lot of the good things come in that way. Now, AI is kind of a beast on its own, so to tame that beast and to use it in a very effective way, in a cost-effective way, I think there's a balance to be had there, and that's probably at the same time a very big challenge, but at the same time a huge opportunity to simplify. We've been spending the last 10 years in trying to simplify the interface with the user. So there's a lot of complexity at the back, but how does that translate to the person operating the unit? I'm 100% in accordance with what Simon says. It needs to be cheap, it needs to be quick, it needs to be simple, it needs to be powered by any type of power source, because you need to plan for the unplannable. And that's where the balance needs to be with AI. But I think we have some very good advancements that we're going to see in the next couple of years, just on that situational awareness part.
Okay, Dag, I'll take you, and
Yes,
then
thank you.
David.
Yes, thank you. So I totally want to mirror what Simon says here, and the IoT is only going to be bigger and bigger. We're going to be monitoring the situation of our teams going into the field. We're going to be monitoring the equipment that's going to be sent into the field. We got water clarification equipment that needs constant monitoring, or water purification equipment that needs constant monitoring, and this is only going to be more and more and more. We even see now with a COVID-19 vaccine distribution, it has to be climate. It has to have a climate, a temperature measurement, constant temperature measurements. So I totally agree that this is only going to be added on into the future. But there's a really, really important thing here. I agree what Francis said. It has to be cheap. It has to be strong. It has to be all that. But first and foremost, it has to be available. Nobody can use it if it isn't available, and it has to be available in the region or even in the country if possible. But okay, who is going to take on that responsibility to have all that? Because there's all kinds of different measurements. We got temperature, we got movement, we got all kinds of measurements that need to be done, but it needs to be available. And I think that's the key point.
Okay, thank you. David?
Yeah, and not to pile on an echo, but the Internet of Things will and already is greatly impacting preparedness and early response. I mean, if you look at all the sensors that are today measuring rivers, for example. So if you know that upstream a river is flooding, then you can warn the people downstream that the floods are about to come, and obviously save lives in the process. Many years ago, tsunami warning devices following the Indian Ocean tsunami were installed as a way of providing, again, early warning. And that's a precursor, if you will, of the Internet of Things. Another, I think, great potential is any sort of technology through the Internet of Things that can track movements of people. We know following the disasters, communities that are affected, they will relocate to an area that they perceive as safe. For someone who's looking to deliver aid, it's critically important to know where are the affected communities, where are the injured, where are the hungry. So the Internet of Things truly has great potential in providing early warning as well as the early response, and quite honestly, save lives and minimize damage to property.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. What we have noticed, I must say, talking from experience from the CDEMA point of view, after, for instance, Maria, after Irma, after Dorian, you get calls from lots of vendors wanting to sell you lots of equipment with the latest and greatest technology and all these things. Tell me something. What, as experts in the field, what advice would you give to an organization who has to, go this route, outfit teams who they deploy to ensure, optimum communications, optimum connectivity between the deployed teams and maybe the base station, maybe another country, a base station in country at maybe the emergency operations center. What advice would you give them to sort of navigate, the sales pitches that get thrown at them?
Well, if I can kick off, I think there are at least 4 criteria. If I were advising someone who is receiving multiple proposals for telecommunications equipment to be used in a disaster, I would, in no particular order, it's mentioned already, low cost. We know preparedness is not the most well-funded form of a budget in a disaster response agency. So saving money upfront on the cost, that's going to be really important. I think something that people often miss is what's the cost and the complexity of maintaining equipment? Is it sensitive to temperature and humidity changes? So you want equipment which is robust, not just in the disaster, and you certainly need that. I mean, equipment is going to be knocked around. It's going to be subjected to heat. It's going to be subjected to being dropped. You want robust, certainly during the response, but also robust as it sits in a warehouse, potentially for years. You also need easy to operate. That was mentioned earlier, with the constant turnover of personnel. And that's just a sad reality in the IT telecoms world. You need equipment that people are going to be requiring minimal training to operate. So ease of operation. And then I think it's been mentioned, the low cost again. So the 4 factors, at least: low cost, it's robust, it's easy to operate, and it's easy to maintain.
Sure. Thank you. We'll take Simon, then Dan.
But in your national emergency telecommunication plan, you must have some form of connectivity. You must have some form of telecommunications. Otherwise, and that means satellite bandwidth reserved for disaster relief. Otherwise, what happens is you just have bits of metal in the garage that are related to very little. There was a story, I think, last year of an island nation being hit, and they'd bought some equipment. They'd been trained on it 2 years ago, but they hadn't bought any satellite bandwidth to go with that equipment. So the disaster struck, they pulled their equipment out, and of course, they couldn't get any telecommunication connectivity for the government because what they were relying on is a satellite operator having the right satellite covering them in the right frequency band with the right power requirements for their equipment, and to have available bandwidth so that they could help them and to be in contact with them. As a consequence, this government failed its population because they didn't have connectivity for several weeks. So that is an example of concentrating just on equipment and not realizing equipment is one part of the equation. Unless you have satellite bandwidth, you have no telecommunications, okay? You're simply living on a prayer. You don't have a plan. So what I'd say is that if you have, for example, satellite connectivity for islands in the Caribbean, for example, you might have 2 cable connections for that particular island. Okay, if you add 2 more satellite terminals, you've gone from 2 exterior connectivity to 4 exterior connectivity. You've increased the resilience of that island by 100%. Okay, if you buy the equipment, you've done nothing. You've just bought bits of metal. So, and as I've said before, this satellite bandwidth can be used for thousands of applications at times of peace. So e-government, reducing digital divide, education connectivity, and then immediately when there's a disaster, it gets swapped over to disaster relief. So for me, it's a question of, sure, equipment is important, but without communication, without telecommunications, it's worthless. Thank you. That's me.
Thank you. Thank you. Well taken. Dag?
Yeah, for sure. I think Simon came a little bit into a point here that is, I think, the most important thing here, and that is plan. Do it beforehand, not when after the disaster have hit. Have a telecommunications plan for each region, for each area, for each country, each island. This is the key point here. It's much cheaper to prepare than to respond. I've heard figures that it's up to 4 times more expensive to respond than to prepare for it. So, and I can promise you that the prices will probably only be higher after the disaster than if you can go out with little bit more lead time and get more quotations. So I totally agree on that. And and by planning, by having a telecommunications plan, you know what you're going to do. You know what you need. I think that's the key point here. We've also seen, and this is typical for all kinds of disasters, you get too little of some things, but way too much of other things. So that the funds are not necessarily used as well as possible. But by doing it beforehand, by doing the plan, you can for sure work on that. One thing here that maybe is something for the whole sector to talk about, and that might be more standardization. Is that something that we can do? Standardize what type of equipment we use. I'm not talking about necessarily manufacturer or service provider. I'm talking about what kind of equipment. I'm also talking about the ability to connect different types of equipment easily. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dag. We'll take Francis and then Rogerio.
Thank you. We're covering, I think, a lot of things here. I do agree with the last comment you just made, Dag, about can we have equipment that can work with the other equipment? And I think this comes back to cost, but the efficiency of what we're spending. Coming back to your question, Oronde, in terms of advice, and I took all of those notes: low cost, maintenance, easy to operate, minimal training. It kind of looks, David, like I gave you a sales pitch before of what we do, but it's true. There's the maintenance thing, and I think from Simon's comment of the equipment is not enough. You need to think about what is the plan. When you're buying, I'm not the satellite expert, but once you buy satellite, you need to know, do I have coverage from the satellite network in my area? Do I have the proper equipment? And did I pay for a plan that I'm going to be able to use when I need it? So that's on the satellite thing. Our way of seeing things, and I can repeat all that: the cost, the maintenance, the ease of use, swapping equipment on place or parts of the equipment if it's broken, if it's damaged. There's one thing I want to add on low cost. Be aware that low cost, but from companies like Eutelsat, who have been around for a long time and who know your reality, I think you need to have a pre-vetted kind of, I wouldn't say a list of equipment, but of people who know your reality and who's been there before, who have customers who have been there and have been using it for a time. Because I'm sure everyone here has seen from time to time companies pop up with a solution that they're proposing, but you find out that it's opportunistic. They're seeing that there's money to be made and they want to put something together, but they really don't have the experience. And that is a very, very important part. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to talk about, and it kind of differs a little bit, is how do you do forward coordination with equipment when you do not have any backhaul? Because as Simon says, equipment is equipment. If you don't have the network, you can't do anything with it. Our take is that even though you do not have any backhaul that is currently available, you could still do forward coordination. And what I mean by that is that you can bring people together with different radios, with different equipment, with Apple phones or Android phones, and you can still do forward work while you're waiting for a backhaul to be set up, if that's the case. And I think that this is critical because it allows you, with everyone who's around and in your area, that you can coordinate the work and you can still carry the communications at a local level. And when the backhaul is available, then you can link all that together and have a common operating picture. And for me, this is something that, from what we've seen from customers, once they have the backhaul, it's like, okay, we're running 100%. Now we have exactly what we want on the communication side to carry the operations, but we are not held up by the backhaul on the local level if the backhaul is not available. So that would be part of my advice on what to think about, on top of the cost, the maintenance, the easy to use, and all that.
Okay, thank you. Rogerio?
Yeah, just commenting on something interesting. As I said, I'm a system engineer it's a background, but since 10 years ago, I decided to be a humanware specialist. And I think it's linked to what Simon said. I was saying all the time, hardware you can buy depending on your budget. Software you can also buy or develop depending on your budget and human resource capability. But and then in one of the workshops we were speaking, I said, but if the humanware is not in place, and the humanware is not only one category of humanware, because there's the difference. You need the humanware in the management, so the connectivity, the bandwidth that Simon mentioned would be there. It was planned by the humanware that plans, as Doug said, and the humanware that's going to implement. From ONCHA perspective, I think our focus has become more on target on the humanware, because hardware software is easy to buy as such. It's a piece of metal that you buy, then you put the connectivity. You guys have said easy to maintain, easy to transport, to operate, and low cost, of course, because we are in a world that cost is important. But let me focus on the humanware part of it, because humanware needs to interact, as Francis said. For ONCHA perspective, we need to interact with the national authorities, We need to interact with humanitarian UN agencies and NGOs. And most recently, we are more and more focused to interact with population who will benefit from our service. So let's say your computer or your antennas, your radios, your transporter, everything that we're gonna put to them. As Simon said, when they have trained 200 people, and then when they need it, where is these people? Where is this? My humanware has gone. And now what? No matter the plan we did, no matter the hardware placed in a place, and we can provide the bandwidth, but suddenly you need to replenish again very quickly. That's why solutions we provide, and I'm feeling very comfortable with dealing with you talking about communication, hardware, heavy equipment that usually we don't deal too much. We use yourselves and your skills, your organization, helping us to deliver their system, but not pay attention to the communication aspect as we're talking here. So I'm bringing this human touch on this conversation to enrich the dynamics and to think about it. Because when you put a software, like Simon said, when you negotiate about connectivity, it's important to have these elements, because most of the times, from my experience, the failures is there on the humanware. And then we spend a lot of time to fix and to reorganize and to replenish, spending valuable time, or sometimes spending more money than we have spent before, to adjust and to provide the solution on the as fast as the emergency requires for us. Different than planning on the long term, emergency requires fast solutions all the time, with a probability to be making mistakes and to correct next steps. So I would like to introduce the talk about communication with community, or engage with communities, because they are the beneficiary as well. And sometimes that's where the place where we're gonna find the technician that can help Simon to put that equipment on top again, since the trained ones have left. So knowing a bit and building this relationship with local community organizations sometimes helps a lot when you don't have the specialized colleagues who were trained on our regular programs and things like that. So keep the word humanware, because it's gonna come to next discussions.
All right, thank you very much, Rogerio, very much. Yes, indeed, and we have found that, you know, everything starts with the community. You know, you work for the community up, and you'll make great strides. I just have, actually, I'll probably come back to you, Rogerio. As you know, humans in general are visual beings, and they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Speak to us on the business intelligence solutions, you know, to do for visualization and, you know, data analysis for better decision making.
I think this is what has been helping us to improve decision-making process. And now we are in the process of telling managers how to use data and to take decision based on evidence, as you mentioned. For those who use the business intelligence software, it helped a lot. Before, we have to hire programmers or a team of programmers to design a system, and it was not easy to produce one dynamic dashboard like today. Any person who has abilities on Power BIs or any other software in the market can do in hours. And dynamic, what is even best. So before, you design one form based on interviews, and colleagues have to expect that what he was thinking was reflected in a screen and could be printed. Now, every manager or every user can do clicks and changing the data there in a simple clicks. It requires programming, but it's much easier than, let's say, 5 years ago. And in the past 3 years has been exploded. Almost every organization has one business intelligence expert designing dynamic dashboards. And this is a huge transformation on our work, at least, data analysis, because you can really play a lot You can provide a dynamic suit to every manager to take decision, basically everything. Before you had to systematize things in emergence, most of the time partners are using Excel, and not many experts in Excel to design a system, and this improved a lot. So business intelligence platforms are helping us a lot, and again, requiring software, requiring equipment to run, but at least we have these organizations here and many others supporting us to provide the required bandwidth or the required internet connectivity for us to move on, developing to positive effects on this thing and make decisions faster, but not faster. Fast decision maybe not the best decision, but better decisions, I think.
All right, thank you. Thank you. This is more, this question is more for both Simon and David, the satellite guys. One of the things that keeps coming up whenever we speak satellite is that eyes roll, and the first thing we hear is that, oh, satellite is so expensive. Well, how do you address that when that comes up? You know, satellite is too expensive. Satellite is so expensive. I know from experience that the technology has progressed by leaps and bounds over time. So just speak to us on that, you know.
Okay, may I go first?
Sure.
I'd like to thank UNOCHA because I use your dashboards a lot, and they're a great tool, and they've helped us a lot in our response to COVID, certainly in Africa. And in fact, I went to your data center opening in Holland, and it was very impressive. So thank you very much. That's a great tool. So to the idea of satellite is expensive, I think we have to be clear that I think the decision makers' experience of satellite is from 2008 and before. And the problem with that is that the satellite industry has only really been making consumer priced data satellites since 2008. And we've had our first generation of high throughput satellites, which reduced the price of a megabit by, say, 30%. And we now have generation 2.0, very high throughput satellites coming online now. And the difference is, for example, is our first generation was 100 gigabits a second. Our second generation is 500 gigabits a second. And this is Eutelsat's VHTS over Europe. Now, as to other prices, terminal prices, yes, they used to be very expensive, in the thousands. Now, for example, in Africa, you can buy a complete system, antenna, modem, everything, for $250. Okay, this modem, this VSAT system will do 20 megabits up and 100 megabits down for $250. And the subscription that goes with that, the subscriptions start at $15 a month. Now, imagine that in 2008. So you can see the distance and the development that the satellite industry has put in, the effort we put into reducing costs. Now, I'm not saying that satellite connectivity will supply 100% of connectivity. No. And if you have fiber and if you have satellite, probably you will choose fiber because it will be less expensive. But you have to look at how far we've come. And another thing you need to remember about satellite connectivity is it's now the most reliable form of connectivity in the world. The FCC, okay, in the US has for the last 5 years rated the top 2 satellite operators in the US as the most reliable form of connectivity. Eutelsat satellite availability is 8 nines. So that's 99.999999. Okay, so that's the most reliable technology you could get. So imagine now that you're marrying availability, coverage, and a reasonable price with excellent, the best reliability of connectivity. It's a marriage made in heaven for disaster relief communications. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Yeah, and I would just, a couple of points. Prices have come down dramatically, both in terms of the satellite capacity, the usage of the satellite, as well as the equipment on the ground. Obviously, I'm not in a disaster zone, but I'm actually today in a rural part of the United States, and this is coming to you via a broadband satellite, a consumer-focused broadband satellite connection. So clearly, the prices are to the point that what was true 15 years ago is no longer true. The other point I would stress is, and this touches in part on what Simon just said, satellite is frankly, in many disaster contexts, the only technology that can be quickly restored, communications technology. Principally because most of the infrastructure is outside the disaster zone, sitting hundreds, thousands of kilometers up in space. So it is very much reliable. And we've talked about the ease of deploying today's antennas compared to 15 years ago in terms of cost, in terms of maintenance, in terms of operation, training. So not to minimize the importance of getting the cost of satellite capacity down as low as possible. It clearly is important, but you have to also take into account it may be the only effective way to restore communications. And frankly, in most disaster contexts, it is the only effective way to quickly restore communication services. And once you've restored communication services, you're then able to launch a much more effective disaster response that can alleviate the human suffering, mitigate further property damage, and generally start the process, long as it may be, towards recovery. So yes, prices have come down, and very much satellite connectivity is frankly the best form of communications infrastructure post-disaster.
Okay, thank you very much. Guys, I know our time is winding down. So what I would like to do is to invite each of you to just, provide some closing remarks. So I'll start with Francis.
Yes, I will link this with what David and Simon just said about satellite and the plans and the availability. Our perspective, and that's what we want first responders to keep in mind, is that the equipment needs to be available for minor to major catastrophes. So it's an equipment that can be used for a local event all the way up to a national or international disaster. And what we really come with all the time is the concept of scalability that is linked with availability. So the scalability is, regardless of the event, a hub providing communications from 10 to 150 people without the added complexity is something that we see as important. I want to touch, and this is my final remark, on radio communications, because a lot of search and rescue teams that we work with, yes, they will work with satellite, but their first area of work will be done with HF radios that could go throughout the island without other connectivity. So this is really at the individual perspective. Now, the part of interoperability that we want to have, or that you would want to have, is to make sure that you can connect the different radios together. For example, and we touched this at the beginning, with mutual aid partner countries or local partners that are coming in to help. How can all of those talk to each other at a central location using different types of gears and different types of radios? That is one thing. How could you bridge those radio conversations and take those radios out to a central location, like a central hub, headquarters, a natural disaster center where you have concentrated people and equipment there? And how can you take that radio conversation and link that to a satellite, and so that radio conversations can go on from two different radios at different islands that are 100 miles apart, but those can still have a radio-to-radio conversation using satellite waves. So that concept of scalability and availability of different equipment and tying that in together, again, with the simplicity factor that we've talked about in the past, is for us, and from what our customers are saying, a very key factor to make sure that no matter what happens, they are prepared and they can link people together that normally would not be able to speak.
Thank you very much. Rogerio?
I'll make it short, just to thank you, GRV Global, for putting us together and have this interesting discussion and bringing the top quality technology that is satellite and all these benefits that the humanitarian world has received from colleagues here in companies that has made tremendous effort. And I was so happy to see that the cost, we wanna keep hoping that the cost keeps going down, Simon, and we keep using and benefiting from the wonder of this technology that definitely help us a lot, not only satellite, but every communication cell equipment. I'm from the time when to have a satellite phone in Africa back in 90s, it was really costly. And have that operation running was massive amount of money required. And today you can put a satellite phone like a cell phone on the hands of basically anyone with our support. So let's keep focusing on our HumanWare, the training, the people who trains others or provide the service to us. And let's keep paying attention for those who need our assistance. I cannot close in remarks from OSHA without saying that our main objective is here, our effort is here, because there are millions of people out there who really needs a lot from our support, and every effort we can make, it's not even sufficient, but we are trying hard to make it better on a daily basis. So thanks for being here, Oronde, to facilitate our discussion, and colleagues to provide great insights and learning. For me, a lot of new learning as well, and but for participants who are listening to us as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rogerio. Simon?
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you very much to the panel. I think it's been a very interesting discussion. Satellite introduces a unique level of resilience. In fact, unless you have satellite connectivity in your national emergency telecommunication plan, you don't really have a resilient network, and I'll explain why. Satellites are in space. They're not affected by terrestrial events such as hurricanes or earthquakes. Satellite coverage offers you universal coverage over regions or continents, so that you have one resource covering many countries, and those countries can share the cost of that resource. It's quick to deploy, so that as long as you have suitable terminals and you have the bandwidth bought and waiting for you, then obviously you can be active and communicating within an hour, offering broadband support to your first responders or to your population. Now, the other thing with satellite terminals is they work on low power. So you can have a very easy power solution with solar panels and batteries. That means that you don't have to have a generator. And more importantly, you don't have to have trucks driving around trying to fill up the generators. And lastly, you don't have to have a reservoir of diesel waiting to fill these trucks. So that it makes disaster response, makes improvising around these problems that happen in every disaster very much easier if you have a well thought out and complete satellite solution in your plan. And I mean, that's from A to Z. A is the equipment and Z is the bandwidth. Do not forget that. And as I've said before, you know, it's this bandwidth that you've got for the region can be used for multiple purposes at civil, when it's at times of peace, and then at times of disaster can get switched over to disaster communication support. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And first of all, thank you for, it's been a very, very interesting discussion here, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this. What I want to say is start planning for your next disaster, not tomorrow, but today, as soon as possible, and plan what you're going to do. know what you need, know what are your first responses going to be, and things like that. So I think that's the main key here, is plan and have a communications plan for the country. Human resources. So I want to mirror a little bit what Simon said here earlier. It isn't enough to just train and wait 2 or 3 years and think everybody will be up to date at that time. Training has to be regularly. People has to use the equipment. I'm not saying maybe not on a daily basis, but regularly. Equipment that's been put up in a warehouse, laying there for 2 years, not getting software updates, not being used, will not be effective when it comes to using it or deploying it. So just the simplest thing as getting software updates and things like that. So keep your equipment connected and up to date, and use it. Have people use it. That way they learn how to use it. That way they are able to use it when it comes to the disaster. I think these are the main pointers here, and give your IT people or IT specialists or your technicians the disaster response training, so that they know what it is to respond to a disaster, who to talk to, and where they can get the information they need. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Well, I'm going to echo a lot of what Dag just said. Preparedness, I know it's not sexy like response, and very often the public and governments throw a lot of money at response, and rightly so. But as Dag pointed out earlier, the return on investment in preparedness starts at 4 to 1, meaning if you spend $1 on preparing your community, you'll save $4 when that community is struck by disaster in terms of the cost of the response to the disaster. We have seen it. There are all sorts of studies which show that it makes financial sense to prepare communities for disasters. We very much know which communities are vulnerable to floods, earthquakes, and other natural and unfortunately man-made disasters. Prepare those communities. Preparedness means purchasing the right equipment. It means training the right people, and constantly, to the point made by Dag just now, retraining new people to account for turnover. It means not waiting for the last minute to secure that satellite capacity. Simon talked about a truly horrible situation where a government had not secured satellite capacity before the disaster, and that delayed the reprovisioning of communication services by weeks. And we all know if you don't have good communication services, you do not have a good disaster response. So again, back to preparedness. Prepare, prepare, prepare. For those in the audience who are with governments that control budgets, I would just emphasize the need to fund preparedness efforts. If you're looking for a how-to in the telecom world, the International Telecommunications Union, the ITU, which is a UN agency, about a year ago, they published a how-to manual for governments on telecommunications preparedness for disasters. And there are all sorts of references. Talk to your disaster management people, and by all means, as a final word, prepare, prepare, prepare. 3 final words. Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. All points well taken. We look forward to the question and answer session. I just want to say it's been a pleasure to have the panel and to be moderator on this panel. And I want to say thank you very much. I'm Oronde Lambert, the ICT manager at CDEMA. And our philosophy is resilient states, resilient lives. And we look forward to the question and answer session as it comes up. Thank you very much.